Big Brother loves you.
Big Brother is watching you.
War is peace.
Double think, comrade, double think.
For freedom is slavery.
The thought police, comrade. Welcome to the Ministry of Love.
Ignorance is strength.
It is one of the 20th century's most widely read books. A direct warning against the madness that lurks in modern times. George Orwell set this nightmare tale in England, in what was then the near future. It was a Cold War novel, and yet today, years after the Iron Curtain has come down, it continues to warn against a serious flaw in human nature, the lust for total power and control. Written in the late 1940s, this historic book was given a short, memorable title.
It was a cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13.
George Orwell's novel 1984 begins with clocks tolling 13 times. 1300 hours, the precise, efficient 24-hour clock, the time of the police and of the military. The time of authority.
To look closely at your fellow workers, at your neighbors, even at your parents and children. Watch their activities. There could be spies working and living...
Winston Smith is the central character of the book. Depressed, in poor health and trapped, he is the ultimate anti-hero.
Big Brother is watching you. You should be watching them.
Hundreds of powerful explosions.
He is a minor member in the outer ring of the inner party, known as Ingsoc. This was Orwell's satirical jab at the English Socialists, a major left-wing political party in Britain at the time of the Second World War. The year of 1984 was still a quarter of a century away when Orwell began writing the book, shortly after the end of the war.
Good news from the Malabar front. Eurasian soldiers have been...
In the future world of the book, society had been divided into three great superpowers. England and the United States had become a totalitarian society called Oceania. The USSR was a dictatorship called Eurasia, and China and its allies were known as Eastasia. The three superpowers waged endless wars.
For the last 3 weeks, more than...
Iron output has risen 3% this past fiscal year in spite of a shortfall of iron ore.
In Orwell's nightmare vision, television was a tool of the party. Developed as two-way devices, telescreens blared propaganda, while built-in cameras spied on people around the clock. They wanted to catch them with bad thoughts, a criminal activity called thought crime.
Don't move. You're under arrest.
People just disappeared, without a trace. No one dared question anything.
Reading Orwell, what is terrifying is the absence of all hope. You go in there and there is no way to resist. There's no way to remain a normal human being within that machinery.
You see, Orwell didn't think necessarily that the war had ended in 1945, and a lot of people didn't. Would the Soviets stay at the accidental military line where they ended? I think people who now go back and say, well, Orwell was a Cold War warrior, you know, and his hatred of communism was out of proportion, I think they just lack any historical perspective.
Enemy of the people, Comrade Rosenblum, was executed for participating in a plot to assassinate Big Brother and several cabinet members. Comrade Rosenblum's public hanging was scheduled for Saturday on the Ministry's Asbury Square scaffold. An offer of
Winston Smith toils in the bowels of an Ingsoc party ministry, the Ministry of Truth.
Times 14,284, meaning plenty mal-coated chocolate.
His daily orders are to rewrite history, literally.
Rewrite for wise. Of sub anti-Friday.
The previous version of the truth is packed away and thrown down the memory hole. It is party policy rigidly enforced to maintain absolute control. In the totalitarian society Orwell describes, there are the elite party members and the proletariat. The party ignores the proles and feeds them poor food, poor alcohol, and poor books. The books are so bad that Orwell describes them as being written by machines. One of the novel's main characters is Julia. Orwell never gave her a last name. She works in the fiction department, a bureau of the Ministry of Truth. It is a wonderful Orwell twist. Julia isn't a writer, she is a mechanic, maintaining the clanking machines that automatically write pornographic fiction.
He was satirizing the meanness and beastliness of man, not just political systems, but of man himself. And the picture that you get is of an extreme picture of human behavior.
In 1984, those who control the past, ran the party slogan, control the future. And those who control the present, control the past. For the citizens of Oceania, Ingsoc controlled everything. Early in life, and his bouts with the lung disease were becoming worse. The remote, windswept isle seems like a difficult place for a dying man to have chosen. As a result of his poor health, Orwell, usually a quick and prolific writer, spent almost 3 years writing 1984.
He was a very puritanical man. He didn't enjoy creature comforts. He didn't want to sit comfortably by a roaring fire having a lovely time. Also, he was so far from hospital when he was in such poor health. I think he may have thought there was going to be a nuclear war. I mean, I think Jura would have been a very safe place had there been a direct hit on London.
Jura's a much harsher landscape, and most of it is mountainous. It's what the Scots call a crofting country, very, very small farms indeed. He wanted to be on his own. I think the image in his mind was the countryside. It was a place where he could be immune from the interruptions of London and could be left to himself to write. A lot of writers, after all, think of this, but they usually choose the south of France with good train connections.
George Orwell was his pen name. He was born Eric Arthur Blair in Bengal, India, in 1903. His father was a minor civil servant in a colonial agency. The family managed to get young Eric into Eton, where he did not excel academically, although he loved to read.
I interviewed a very old man who had been one of his masters at Eton, who just cursed him for being a slacker and wasting the time. But he still remembered vividly his annoyance at Orwell throwing away the chances that were offered him. But when I began to put leading questions to him, that after all he did do a hell of a lot of reading, he said, yes, oh, he did a lot of reading, but it wasn't on the syllabus.
In the 1920s and 30s, Orwell developed his writing as a journalist and political essayist. One of his first books was about the devastated lives of the poor in Paris and in London. He had decided not to publish under his real name, Eric Blair. Instead, he chose to call himself George Orwell.
But of course, if you fail with a first book as a young man or young woman, then you can start off with another name or go back to your real name.
As an economic depression spread across the globe in the 1930s and old hatreds flared into wars, Orwell had much to observe and write about. It was a terrible time in world history. Years later, as he worked on 1984 in the isolation of the island farmhouse, he reflected on the 2 decades of World War, genocide and torture that had just passed. Orwell projected these terrifying trends into the future. What if, he thought, what if? What if a tyrant were to take the idea of a minute of silence, common on national memorial days, and turn it on its head?
The 2 minutes hate exercise lured even the reluctant into its hideous ecstasy of fear and vindictiveness. A desire to kill, to torture, to smash faces in with a sledgehammer.
But you see, this is a naughty piece of Orwell's black humour. It's sardonic humour. Instead of the 2 minutes remembrance for the dead, you have the 2 minutes willing the other side to be dead.
Orwell had lived through an era when Hitler and Stalin often whipped up national hysteria to rid themselves of political enemies. To satirize the tyrants, he had created the ultimate enemy of Big Brother. Goldstein was the target for the rage of Oceania's citizens. Goldstein was a thinly disguised reference to Trotsky, Stalin's political rival, who was eventually assassinated. Each 2-minute hate would always end with Big Brother reappearing on the screen, to the relief of everyone in Oceania. The hates were Orwellian satire aimed at political leaders who dream of total control over the minds of each and every citizen. In the last half a century, mass demonstrations and organized hates have been a regular feature of television news. But television itself has also become an instrument for manipulating hatred.
We hated Saddam Hussein, and we had some reason to think that we ought to hate him. Then we hated Osama bin Laden. We don't know what he's done, really, but we hate him, and our hate is kept going. We used to hate Gaddafi, but we've sort of stopped hating Gaddafi because things in Libya have calmed down a bit. But undoubtedly, over the next year or two, there will be other hate people set up for us. And of course, it's true that we all long to hate. There's something in us that likes to hate, and Orwell was very, very perceptive about that.
1984 was published at the beginning of the Cold War, a period of intense hatred and fear, and the book was quickly taken up as an ideological weapon by the West against the East. The irony is that George Orwell's politics were decidedly left-wing. Later he argued that he had written the book in outrage, a blast against totalitarianism anywhere, in the West as well as in the Soviet Union. But there is no doubt Orwell held a seething hatred for Stalin. A decade before he began to write 1984, he had experienced the terror of totalitarian power during the Civil War in Spain. The Spanish Civil War erupted in 1936. It was a classic confrontation for modern times, the rich against the poor. fascists against communists, the right versus the left. It was also a puppet show preamble to the main event, which would soon explode, World War II. Orwell quickly obtained journalist credentials, and with his bride Eileen, headed for Barcelona. He wanted to be more than just a war correspondent.
He's supposed to have told his publisher when he asked him why he was going, well, someone's got to kill fascists. I mean, he's much more like an early American Republican. You know, if you feel there's injustice, you unsling your gun from the cottage or farmstead door and you go out and join the militia.
And he did just that, joining up with a workers' militia called the POUM, the POUM. He knew the Pumistas were fighting the right-wing fascists, but he knew little about the political complexities of the Spanish left. There was vicious infighting between some of the workers' groups and the communist forces, supported by the Russian Communist Party. Orwell was soon caught up in more than one war.
And this is, I think, the hardest thing for non-Spaniards to understand. Especially in America, we associate the communists with a revolutionary line. And here in Spain, the communists were actually against the revolution. And that's what I think is very confusing for us to understand. But I think in this case, the communists in Spain were following the foreign policy concerns of the Soviet Union and Stalin rather than the concerns of the workers within Spain.
Stalin was concerned that a victory for the workers in Spain would alarm Western nations. He wanted total power over where and when workers would revolt against their bosses. Orwell was outraged at the Russians' betrayal. During a skirmish in April 1936, Orwell was wounded, shot through the throat. It would affect his speech for the rest of his life. He was sent to Barcelona to recover. But once there, Orwell was dismayed to find the solidarity of the leftists had splintered into factional fighting. The Stalinists were soon rounding up the militia and arresting their leaders. George Orwell and his wife fled north. It was a close escape. By the spring of 1939, the fascists had won. It was a devastating defeat for the left, and Orwell was convinced that Stalin's divisive campaign of deceit and terror was responsible for the victory of the fascist General Franco. In the autumn of 1940, the Battle of Britain began. Hitler ordered the bombing of civilian population centers. In spite of daily air raids, Orwell took a few months to write a book, a kind of children's fable that reflected on his experience with the communists in Spain. It was his first major breakthrough book. Animal Farm begins with the idealistic farm animals rebelling and driving the human owner out of the place. At first they enjoy their freedom and equality, but gradually they realize that some animals have become more equal than others. All the characters from the Russian Communist Revolution, disguised as various animals, make an appearance. A pig called Napoleon, the most vicious pig of all, is of course Stalin.
I think Animal Farm, in Orwell's intention, certainly, is a lament for the revolution betrayed.
Animal Farm is very different in tone from 1984. One reason might be that Orwell's wife, Eileen, had a big impact on the writing, with her comments and her contributions.
It's a much more accessible book than 1984, and it's nothing like so despairing.
The vision of a dark, forbidding world of the future in 1984 may be connected to the tragic turn of events that occurred in Orwell's life. In 1945, just as Animal Farm was about to be published, just as the dark war years were ending and he had adopted a son in anticipation of a brighter future, His wife Eileen died during routine surgery. It was completely unexpected. Less than a year after her death, Orwell made his decision to leave London with his 2-year-old son and move to the island of Jura. He immediately began work on 1984.
This was his last book. He was dying when he wrote it. And I think the combination of despair about Europe, despair about the political future, and despair about his own survival do make this one of the most terrifying books one has ever read.
Steamer! Dead overhead! Get down! Get down!
"1984 has been made into a film 3 times. In the most recent version, John Hurt is Winston Smith.
Rough Times 14284, page 3, byline 2, should read, Miniprod forecast increased chocker Russian, April.
During the day, his job involves destroying the past, but at night, he trawls through London, desperate to find the truth about the past.
Can I help you? What's this? Oh, it's a beautiful thing. It's over 100 years old. Cost you $4. Oranges and lemons. Say the bells of St. Clement's. What was that? Something old.
Orwell idealized what was simple and pure.
On Jura, Orwell noticed the birds. He noticed every little flower and bird. And maybe there was some little thing of hope in the very bleakness of the landscape that spoke to him. I think if you're in a very bleak place and the first primrose comes or the first swallow flies in, it means so much to you.
Yes, you. Bend lower, please. You can do better than that. You're not trying. Lower, please. That's better, comrade.
There was never anything as sophisticated as two-way telescreens in communist bloc countries during the Cold War.
Smoke and tear gas bombs, sometimes boomerang on the East German troops.
But there were hidden microphones and wiretaps everywhere.
There have been many reports of shootings.
It was an all-consuming paranoia, and it was something Orwell saw coming.
I'm 39 and I've had 4 children. Now look! 1 and 2 and 1.
Winston rarely talks to women. His only relationship seems to be with the shrill, authoritarian instructor on the telescreen.
Remember our fighting men.
Then something totally unexpected happens. Winston has noticed that Julia, the girl from the fiction department, has been sneaking glances at him. He assumes that she is with the thought police. She stages a clumsy fall and manages to slip him a note. It's the start of a clandestine and dangerous love affair. The first secret encounter between Winston and Julia in 1984 is in the countryside. It's the only place where there are a few gaps in the web of the ever-watchful telescreens. Winston discovers that Julia has slept with many men. It excites him.
Listen, the more men you've had, the more I love you. I hate purity, I hate goodness. I don't want any virtue to exist anywhere. I want everyone to be corrupt to the bones.
Well then, I ought to suit you, dear. I'm corrupt to the bones.
Good news for all the young women in the anti-sex leagues. Big Brother wants to reward you for your efforts to abolish illicit sex in every nook and cranny of Oceania.
The lovers rent a cheap room above the pawn shop. Even though it seemed odd that there was no telescreen, they continued their rebellion, for that is what it was. To be caught would lead to torture or death, or perhaps something worse.
The most powerful form of science fiction is not a novel or a movie or a story that accurately predicts a future. It's a story that prevents a future. One of the most powerful self-preventing prophecies of all time was George Orwell's 1984, which conveyed an image that was so horrifying that millions of people said to themselves, I am going to devote a certain fraction of my effort for the rest of my life to making sure that this won't happen. Now that's powerful. That's powerful literature.
When 1984, the actual year, came round, not only television, but the whole world had changed in ways Orwell could not have imagined. Mikhail Gorbachev was about to become premier in the Soviet Union, which would lead to the smashing of walls and the downfall of communism. 1984 was also the year that a little-known Pentagon computer network was reorganized to create a separate civilian university network. It would soon become known as the Internet.
I think rereading 1984 in 1999 or 2000, you realize how much of it still speaks to us. There were people who tried to argue that certain things had passed away forever with the Berlin Wall, but there are other aspects of Orwell's nightmare that are with us every day.
The loss of privacy was a central theme in 1984, a theme that has become a reality today.
There's a sense of loss of privacy that now behave differently because you believe you're being monitored, even if nobody's ever looking at the screen. And I think that's what's happening in our society that changes your sense of freedom.
Orwell valued privacy. He moved to the end of the earth to keep it. Even today, 50 years later, telephone salespeople can't bother his old house. There's no telephone.
Hello, is this Evelyn Johansson?
Hello.
When
We're
will she
raising
be
money for the
Michael
Green
Parker
County
Supper?
Patrolmen's Benevolence
This is Cascard.
Association.
Hello,
Would
this
you
is
be
Tim
interested?
Arnold with Steam Quick Carpet Cleaners.
In the United States, one of the most irritating invasions of privacy is the nightly phone calls from the telephone salespeople.
Hello?
Hello there. May I speak to Kelly Martin?
May I ask who's calling?
Hi, Kelly. I'm Monique with Flimflax Diet Supplements. How are you today?
For each and every citizen in the United States, there is an average of 300 files or more containing reams of private data.
I hear your baby there, Kelly. Is it a boy or a girl?
Telemarketers, as they are known, always want more.
Reference the following grade for the DTU 216. Reference to BDR and Martin/Kelly. She terminated at 306.
Cancel, stop, unproceed, construction-wise, and...
Orwell's warning may be coming true.
I completed 72 UTCs with a return estimate of 76% on the GPS.
The loss of privacy, strangers reading your files, reading your images, reading your mind.
Report any strangers. Remember, Big Brother is watching you. You should be watching them.
Supposedly for your benefit, of course.
We were wondering if you've heard of our Flimflax Daily Duo?
No, thank you. Bye.
The line often repeated is that we must give up a little bit of freedom for the convenience and protection. But the freedom we give up is real and known. Unknown is the true nature of the protection we receive in return.
My grandparents were killed because of the gathering of information in Europe, and as a Jew especially, I worry about myself and minorities and what can be done if somebody comes into power and takes all that information and uses it. So it may be somewhat innocuous now, but the enormous power of now knowing everyone's race, religion, which videos they watch, and how many groceries they buy by just tracking their credit cards or where they've been on vacation is terrifying if it falls into the wrong hands.
Winston and Julia had been living a fantasy.
We are the dead.
We are the dead.
You are the dead. Remain exactly where you are. Make no move until you are ordered.
Big Brother was watching.
Now they can see us.
Now we can see you. Clasp your hands behind your heads. Stand out in the middle of the room. Stand back to back. Do not touch one another.
More than 21 million surveillance cameras have been sold and installed worldwide, and that's a modest estimate. A vast silent system of surveillance and control. They are powered up right now, watching for you. At the moment, even with millions of security cameras, our lives remain mostly private by default. Maintained because we are hiding in plain sight, surveillance of our intimate details requires too much effort, for the moment.
Enemy of the people, Comrade Rosenblum was executed for participating in a plot to assassinate Big Brother and several cabinet members.
And that is the obvious flaw in Orwell's concept of the two-way telescreen. Who would watch the watchers, and who would watch them watching? In 1984, people watched people. That is all changing. Computers are already able to recognize faces in a primitive way. A personal computer has the equivalent brain power of, at best, a mouse. But the silicon circuits become brighter and brainier by the day.
By 2020, $1,000 of computation will be equal to the computational capacity of the human brain, which I estimate at about 100 billion neurons. By 2030, $1 of computation will equal the computing capacity of the human brain. Now that's a necessary but not sufficient condition to create computers or non-biological intelligence equal to human intelligence.
Please remain in your vehicle. Exit to the right.
Who will be watching the watchers watch us? Quite possibly, non-biological intelligence.
Look left. Clear the lane immediately. Objects in your...
Presumably, a biological mind, human, will remain in control of the central processing. Presumably. But is that good news?
I think what Orwell made us aware of is how easy it is to transform a whole culture, a whole nation. You can take good people, the best, the brightest, the people with the best values, the most normal, the most healthy, and transform them into fascists, into totalitarian-minded individuals, or mindless individuals, into Orwellian clogs of the state.
In 1971, at Stanford University, Philip Zimbardo learned just how quickly human values can shift during an experiment he had organized in the Department of Psychology. College students, recruited through newspaper ads, were divided up at random into groups of prisoners and guards. The experiment called for those designated prisoners to actually be rounded up and jailed. Zimbardo was shocked when the experiment turned truly Orwellian.
You smile to him, Anthony! You get down here and do 10 push-ups. 2, 3, 4.
Within 2 days, they were hitting them with the clubs, they were cursing them, they were physically abusing them. The boys, college students who were playing the role of guards had become prison guards. Were telling me these guys are dangerous, they have to be kept in chains, they have to be put in solitary confinement all night.
Get in that closet then.
I mean, just total loss of reality in the most Orwellian sense.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
The study was supposed to run for 2 weeks. I had to end it in 6 days because it was totally out of control.
Smoking is a privilege. Smoking is a privilege.
The guards in Zimbardo's experiment had become infatuated with power.
Now, there's a couple ways that we can do this.
Orwell was deeply concerned about this flaw in human nature. It was his central theme in 1984. After their arrest, Winston and Julia are sent to the torture chambers to be re-educated.
The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in power. Not wealth, or luxury, or long life, or happiness, only power. Pure power. What pure power means, you will understand presently.
Julia submits immediately to the torturer's demands, but Winston holds out.
Shall I tell you?
In the torture chambers of the Ministry of Love, they do not seek the truth. They seek converts.
To cure you. Would you understand, Winston, that no one whom we bring to this place ever leaves our hands uncured? Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yes. No. I don't know. Julia!
Get up.
The final chapters in 1984 have become a permanent part of our cultural memory.
Stand up straighter.
In the movie, Richard Burton, in his last screen role before he died, played O'Brien, the inner party chief.
Tell me, Winston, and remember, no lies. What are your true feelings towards Big Brother?
I hate him.
You must love him. It's not enough to obey him. You must love him. Room 101.
He orders Winston to the subterranean room 101 in the Ministry of Love, where individual tortures are custom-made to present each victim with his greatest fear. For Winston, it was rats.
I press the first lever, and the rats move into the front compartment. I press the second, and the door of the cage will slide up.
What do you want?
As the starved rats move closer to Winston's face, he begins to hallucinate that Julia is just beyond the cage.
Do it, Julia.
He holds his love for her guarded in the deepest recess of his heart. But even those feelings he will eventually betray.
Do it to Julia! Do it to Julia!
Beastly.
According to his mother, Orwell's first word was beastly, which is unusual language for a 2-year-old. Towards the end of his life, Orwell became increasingly concerned that the English language was being treated in a beastly manner.
Items 1, 5, 7 ref full wise.
In the book, some of Orwell's blackest humour is aimed at what he thought to be the debasement of language. From mindless clichés and deceptive euphemisms to acronyms that dehumanize and intimidate.
Full wise up file rectify ref 4/6/84 unperson double ungood uncrown. Double plus ungood.
Reference to BDR and Martin/Kelly. She terminated at 3:06 but wanted a TTC on the...
Every year, fewer and fewer words, and the range of consciousness always a little smaller. The whole climate of thought will be different. In fact, there will be no thought as we understand it now. Orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness.
Orwell's disgust with the decline of language and literature was a constant theme in 1984. In the Ministry of Truth, mechanical authoring machines automatically churned out cheap pornographic fiction. A machine intelligent enough to write would have seemed a remote science fiction fantasy in 1949, but Orwell was on the right track.
It doesn't matter. Feeding egos ain't no claim on our souls.
Digital machines don't write pornography yet. However, there is a software program that will generate random poetry of sorts. Tap haiku and it's the Japanese style. The software was written by Ray Kurzweil.
Silent hands, places with manuscripts, looking for the sun.
And every day, such programs become more powerful. In Orwell's time, the powers that be operated from deep inside faceless buildings. But at least they were human. Times faster than nerves inside our brains.
However, human intelligence is much deeper, richer, and capable of dealing with far greater subtlety than machines today. So once a computer can achieve the depth and subtlety and richness of human intelligence and combine it with these natural advantages of sharing knowledge, speed, and accuracy, it's going to be a very formidable combination.
And formidable competition as well for our children and our grandchildren. A truly Orwellian future, if ever there was.
If we just look at a situation where it's intelligent machines and humans, then I can't see humans sort of standing up to that. It would mean that maybe by the end of this century, intelligent machines are running the show and humans are slaves or human farms and human zoos, nothing more.
Toy robots, built by computer students, the sort of toys we often see when the subject is robots. In the future, they won't be toys. They might be us, the result of miniaturization. Entire computer chips as small as diamond dust circulating in our bloodstream. Professor Warwick has taken a step in that direction. He has had a chip implanted in his arm. It is one of the first primitive direct connections between a nervous system and a machine. Later, his wife, Irena, will have a chip slipped under her skin. As the technology evolves, the implants could lead to a direct connection, brain to brain.
So it's looking at the electronic signals that our thoughts being transferred between people, a bit like telepathy, but for real, technically. Or will the brain not be able to cope? We simply don't know.
We simply may not want to know.
Party members honor the glorious
The idea of humans hardwired into a vast network fits the sort of bleak future that Orwell seemed particularly concerned about when writing 1984.
Perhaps Orwell was right in a roundabout way, and that's what we will end up with. The humans that are connected won't just be connected human to one intelligent machine as a standalone, will be a human connected into a network. They will be able to harness the power of that network, but the network will be able to control perhaps the power of the human. Big Brother of a human nature is now Big Brother of an internet nature.
Issued a major report that anticipated pork belly totals will exceed all expectations this coming fall.
After the final terror in Room 101, Winston Smith is released. He has been hollowed out.
He gazed up at the enormous face. Oh, cruel, needless misunderstanding. But it was all right. Everything was all right. The struggle was finished. He had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother.